Callimara here, and no, it's not calamari. Welcome back to my channel, or if you want to join the pond, go ahead and take a dive. You might like it here. So, it's been a while since I uploaded my Jelsa video, and hey, in case you missed it, I also uploaded like a 1.5 version where I give you more reasons to ship Jelsa. But I know what you guys are here for. You're here for the ultimate Jelsa fanfiction, and it is finally here. And so, for the format of this video, it's really gonna be more of like an audiobook because I have everything narrated with some really overqualified voice acting because that's just how I roll, you know how it be. And everything is of course written by my good friend Kris, or the Rent You Pay, who is such an amazing writer, and I will always recommend all of their writing ever. You don't really need to pay attention to the screen, but you know, if you want to, you can, because I also made like these really nice illustrations of Jelsa, so if you want to see that, you know, you're free to do that. But yeah, anyway, let's not waste any more time. On with the video. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she saw was him.
Who are you?
You're alive. That's different. But you can see me.
What are you? How did you get here?
The man's expression shuddered. The wide-eyed relief and recognition from just a moment before was gone. He visibly shook the shock from his face, his scar over his right eye twisting and crinkling as his brows furrowed, radiating anger and urgency.
Look, we don't have a lot of time. We'll figure that out later. Do you have any idea what you've done?
Who are you?
The tall man in strange clothing, with a shepherd's hook, with bare feet, was towering over her, eyes cold. Slowly, he turned his head, setting his gaze on a black, empty sinkhole beside them in the glacier's deepest floor, a yawning black abyss into nothing. It hadn't been there when Elsa had lowered herself into the depths of the glacier. At least, she didn't think so. Near the sinkhole was a strange mass of broken blocks of ice, webbed with tiny black veins amidst the cracks. The sight made Elsa shudder.
My name's Jack. For 11,000 years, I guarded this place to keep the darkest, most dangerous creature inside this prison that I built for him, to keep him from doing any more harm.
Cold blue eyes pinned Elsa in place. He whispered.
And you just released him.
Impossibly, chills broke out along Elsa's skin.
Who? How? For 11,000 years?
Elsa swallowed down the familiar and forgotten sharpness of panic.
Look, I'm sorry for whatever it is you think that I've released, but the only thing I care about right now is finding my sister and...
Jack's gaze snapped back to hers, his staff swinging in a wide arc as he shifted into an offensive stance. Heart pounding in her chest, she prepared herself for an attack until...
Anna's already taken care of the dam. We've got bigger problems now.
Elsa blinked, startled into a fresh wave of renewed panic.
Where is she? How do you know?
I know who you are, Elsa. I don't know why you can suddenly see me. Manny sure has a hell of a sense of humor these days with his problem-solving tactics, but it'll make things easier. You and I are going to go out there and fix this before Pitch can destroy anything else.
Pitch?
Jack's jaw tightened.
He's going after her. He's going after all of them. And you're going to help me stop him.
The ice was threatening to take hold of her. She could feel it creeping, its tiny branches crawling from her heart. But with the next inhale, she pushed it back and forced it down. Jack, this stranger, this spirit, watched on, eyes widening, as Elsa released her fear and anger in the next exhale, freeing herself from the claws of her powers, and to control once more. Chin lifted, shoulders back, Elsa slipped into herself, the bearing of a queen, and the soul of the spirit who was created to hold the world together. Elsa stared at the man, and tightened her fist behind her back.
Well...
She glared as the ice beneath her feet began to thrum and crack.
You're not the first strange creature to deliver a cryptic warning, and I've learned not to trust them. Sorry.
Jack's readied position did little to prepare him for the giant crevice that cracked sunk into the floor of Atahalan's heart, creating another sinkhole beneath his feet. The sudden force caught him off guard, and he slid beneath the ice in the space of a single breath. By the time he tried to launch himself from the sinkhole, the ice had fused back together, trapping him beneath the floors. A startled shout escaped him, but Elsa did not dare listen. With a burst of power at her feet, a pillar erupted from the icy floor underneath, and she launched herself higher, running up the stairs to the main cavern. Her lungs screamed in protest, and her legs refused to carry her faster, and her head pounded with the energy she had exhausted.
You're still wounded,
she thought, slamming her shoulder into the edge of a wall in her haste to cut the corner.
No, you're fine. You're fine. You just need time to recover from whatever that was.
The knock was waiting for her when she arrived, panting and breathless at the shoreline. But he was wailing in his distress and urgency.
Tuana!
She cried, mounting the knock and urging him over the waves.
Hurry!
Elsa allowed herself only one look back, not because of him and the story he told, but because, at last, despite everything she had ever believed, she had found a home, and now she was leaving it. Elsa urged her steed forward, the knock's hooves barely touching the sea surface as they galloped with the speed of a tempest. The knock shimmered with an ethereal blue light, its mane flowing like liquid sapphire. She could feel the force of the wind against her skin, but it was nothing compared to the icy dread that clutched her heart. Whoever that man had been, that spirit or jailer, he would fare on his own once he escaped from the cage she'd sunk him into. She didn't dare hope that he wouldn't follow her, no doubt with vengeance fresh on his mind, but Elsa would deal with him later. Arendelle needed her now. She was still not quite right since climbing into Atahalan's depths, since whatever happened down there. But Elsa knew that the moment she awoke was the exact moment, precisely, when Anna fulfilled her destiny, and answered Elsa's desperate warning by freeing the Northuldra from the spell cast by the cruelty and greed of their grandfather. High up in the mountains, the dam broke, unleashing a monstrous wave that roared down the canyons, threatening to engulf her beloved kingdom. As Elsa and the knock broke into the fjord, she could hear it. Desperation and determination drove her past exhaustion, past panic and terror, past the blood rushing through her ears or the horrible pounding that was hammering in her head. Elsa gasped as she pressed forward, filling up her aching lungs with ragged breath, realizing the speed with which the tidal wave was closing in.
Faster!
She begged.
It's too close!
The wave was almost upon them. The knock swerved around just before reaching the edge of Arendelle's castle, a few mere paces from the protecting wall, and sensed her intentions before she even fully understood them herself. He reared up on his hind legs with the force of Elsa's summons. A great wave of energy pulsed outward as she raised her hands forward, calling her magic with a desperate, broken,
"Please!"
Hooves thundered onto the waves below them with another pulse of energy, their bodies falling hard onto the surface. But Elsa gritted her teeth and bore through it, holding her arms out to conjure the wall, the only chance that Arendelle had for survival against the onslaught. In a blinding light, the water before them rose up, frozen in thick, monstrous, brilliantly bright fractals, reaching toward the sky and only just barely catching the first rolls of thunderous waves. But the ice was growing too slowly. Elsa cried out as the tidal wave rammed into the shaky edges of the foundation, and the fury of the sea toppled over and around Elsa's ice wall, catching rocks and windows around her as it flooded into the castle behind her, spilling onto the shore. With a guttural roar, Elsa pushed her shield back against the wave. She spat away the salt and the pain as the sea sprayed into her hair and face, but the wall, her ice, refused to grow, and the vastness of the wave was simply too much. Elsa's entire frame shook with the weight placed against her, with the massive energy lodged somewhere deep inside that was beginning to answer her. But the wave was relentless. Beneath her, the knock let out a desperate wail. Elsa heeded the warning too late. She heard the cracks before she saw them, the eerie, otherworldly sound that only ice could make, a haunting melody of eerie twangs and bending ice and sharp cracks reverberating through physical tons of ice. Her final push was fruitless. The tension within the ice built to an unbearable crescendo, and the fractures in the frozen barrier thickened and multiplied, weakening it beyond repair. The wave smashed against it with unrelenting force, and the weakened ice wall shattered into countless shards, dissolving into the sea that subsumed them. The violent collision sent a shockwave through Elsa's body, throwing her from the Nock's back and pressing them harshly against the rock face. Her head thudded against the stone wall, and the breath was knocked from her lungs. For a few moments, all she could hear was the thunder of water, rushing to overtake her. But when she blinked her clouded gaze open, she saw that the Nock stood strong and tall before her, wrapping her safely in a tight bubble against the torrent that now surrounded them, rushing past and slamming slabs of rock from the mortar that binded them.
No!
Elsa begged through blurry vision. Her whole body ached, and she scrambled from the ground to her knees. She tried to stand up, but the thunder in her ears, the shaky weakness in her limb was too much. Elsa looked up through the protective cage the Nock had created for her. Stones and masonry, centuries old, crumbled under the relentless assault. Swept away like driftwood, the great wall was nearly gone. In its absence, Elsa watched through the Nock's window, disbelieving as windows shattered, and the courtyard was reduced to a chaotic jumble of debris. Doors were torn from their hinges and flung into the maelstrom, Arendelle's flag flying into the abyss. After an eternity, the wave receded. It dragged with it the remnants of Arendelle's grandeur, pulling chunks of the castle into the fjord. The mighty structure sagged, weakened and fractured, its silhouette now jagged and broken against the bright blue sky. Pools of seawater filled the courtyard, and the once clear pathways were now treacherous streams of muddy water and rubble. Elsa, bruised and battered, looked upon the destruction, refusing to believe. She had given everything, and still, it had not been enough. Panting hard, Elsa stared incredulously as the Nock smoothly lowered the barrier protecting them, exposing her to the cold, fresh air. The scent of the sea had always been strong in Arendelle, but now it was inescapable. She became aware of her clenched fists, squeezing so hard that little half-moon indentations were dark along her palms. She stared at her hands.
Why?
Elsa knew she had power enough to stop this wave. Why had the ice not answered her call?
The spirits knew,
she reminded herself, struggling to control her breathing. Elsa's gaze darted around the broken castle, and her braid plastered itself to her back as she frantically tried to piece it together.
They knew this would happen. That's why they forced us to flee. It was an evacuation.
A realization cut through her shock and despair. This destruction, as painful and impossible as it was, had been inevitable. The spirits had known it, the trolls had even foreseen it, but more than any of that, Elsa knew this in her bones.
This was retribution.
For the wrongs committed by their ancestors, for the years of harm against the Northuldra, against nature that could never be undone. She had been a fool to think she could stop fate or justice, but the heart of Arendelle was not its castle or her villages. It was her people. It was her sister.
Anna!
Elsa breathed, reaching for the Nock, but he was already there, lowering himself to her so that she could climb onto his back. She did so against the stiffness of her muscles, squinting against the bright light of the sky. When had she last slept, she wondered, clinging onto the Nock's mane to keep from falling. At last, she was seated atop her steed, bracing herself against the inevitable. The castle may have fallen, but Arendelle's spirit would endure as long as its people did. As she looked at the remnants of the castle, determination sparked within her.
Thank you,
she whispered to the Nock, her voice hoarse but steady.
We need to find her.
The Nock, sensing her determination, nodded and shimmered brighter. With a final glance at the broken castle, Elsa set off, her heart heavy but her spirit unyielding. Arendelle would rise again, not from its stones, but from the resilience and unity of its people. And Elsa knew in the deepest, most secret corner of her heart that Anna would be the one to lead them. Elsa rowed across the sea for what felt like ages, until, at last, there she was, on the rocks, overlooking the sea, huddled in Kristoff's arms.
Oh, thank you,
Elsa whispered as tears threatened to spill over, as the Nock's strong legs carried her swiftly toward the person she cared more deeply about than anything else in the world.
Oh, thank goodness!
It was too far to make out all the details clearly, but Elsa could see well enough as Kristoff was summoned by a member of the Northuldra, reluctantly leaving Anna to wait along the shore as he returned to camp to aid with the final preparations. Elsa lowered herself in her seat, urging the Nock to ride faster, faster, faster!
Anna!
She cried, but her sister remained curled in on herself, for Elsa's voice was lost to the wind and waves. As the Nock broke over the cresting surf and reached the shore at last, Anna's tear-streaked face looked up in alarm from the curl of her arms. Elsa stumbled as she dismounted, tripping along the rocks as she scrambled to hold her sister, to apologize for leaving her behind.
Anna, you're all right!
Anna's mournful eyes were glazed with shock and confusion as she took in the sight before her. Elsa's exhausted laughter bubbled out of her as she took in the dirt and dust and bruises of her beautiful sister. Safe, safe, safe! Elsa ignored Anna's outreached hand and lifted her arms to grab hold of her, to pull her close, to press her cheek to hers and promise to never, ever leave her again. But a sickening lurch yanked her heart into her stomach, and then the sharp jut of rocks cut into her palms, her elbows, and her knees. Elsa gasped as the stinging pain cut into her flesh, blinking down in confusion at the gravel beneath her. Elsa caught her breath. A disturbing sensation was threatening to overwhelm her, some sick panic carving out her middle. But Elsa breathed it out and pushed it down. Wincing against the pain in her hands and knees, Elsa lifted herself slightly up off the ground.
Anna?
Her sister was ignoring her. She'd wandered closer to the Nock, who was carrying a mournful sound, stomping his hooves in the shallow waves against the shore. Elsa could only see her sister's back, and the outstretched hand she raised to try to calm the Nock, who was watching on in increasing agitation.
Anna!
Elsa cried out, hurt.
Anna, I'm sorry. I know I shouldn't have left you, but that's no reason to ignore. Anna, are you listening?
As she slowly eased herself standing, all stiff muscles and stinging flesh, a sickening thought flipped her stomach. She strode to Anna's back, reaching for her shoulder. Could Anna be pushing her away, as Elsa had done before, once upon a time?
No, she wouldn't. Then why? Anna, please, look at me.
Impossibly. The hand that reached to grasp Anna's shoulder never caught, and instead passed through. A light sheen of ethereal lilac appeared at the space where hand and shoulder merged, as Elsa's hand touched only air, touched nothing, as it passed through her sister's body as if she were nothing more than a ghost. A startled scream tore through her throat. Elsa pressed both hands forward but caught nothing. Fear had been a growing well inside her for hours, but now terror erupted forth, spilling out and trickling into her veins. But no ice crept from her skin, and no matter how many times Elsa tried to reach her sister, no touch ever made contact. Elsa called her sister's name, but all that came from her throat was a disbelieving, animal-like howl. The Nock reared back on his hind legs, forcing Anna to step back, and stepped through Elsa completely. She stumbled back, the truth sinking in with horrifying clarity. Desperation clawed at her as she tried again and again to make contact, each failed attempt deepening the chasm of despair inside of her.
Anna!
Her voice cracking with the weight of her anguish.
Anna, please! See me! Hear me!
But Anna continued to move away from her, unaware of her sister's presence, tears streaming down her face in grief as she tried to calm the distressed Nock. Shh, shh. She calmed the Nock, who at last let Anna hold his muzzle to her face, although his agitation did not quiet. Hello there, she soothed, clucking and humming, even as she hiccuped through broken sobs, as tears rolled down her cheeks. Where did you come from? Elsa fell to her knees, her shins landing on the cold, wet rocks. Her heart shattered, the pieces scattering like ice crystals. She had fought so hard, endured so much. Suddenly, Anna paused, a shiver running down her spine as if she sensed something. She turned, her eyes wide and searching, but they passed right over Elsa, unable to see the figure kneeling before her.
Anna, please.
Elsa whispered, her voice a fragile thread in the storm.
I'm here. I'm right here.
But the words were lost to the wind, carried away, falling deaf on her sister's ears. The knock reared again, sensing Elsa's distress, and Anna stepped back, her confusion turning to alarm as she looked around frantically. "Elsa?" she called out, her voice trembling. "Elsa, where are you?" Elsa's heart leapt at the sound of her name, but the hope was fleeting. She reached out one last time, her fingers brushing through the air where Anna stood.
I'm here. I'm right here.
But no connection came. No recognition sparkled in Anna's eyes. She remained alone in her spectral plane, unseen and untouched. The knock, sensing the depth of Elsa's pain, lowered its head, its form shimmering and fading into the black waves. As the knock dissolved, Elsa felt an overwhelming wave of loneliness and despair wash over her. She watched helplessly as Anna tried to call back the agitated spirit.
Anna!
Elsa cried out one last time, her voice barely more than a whisper.
I'm so sorry.
The sound of footsteps approaching broke through her despair. Elsa twisted her body towards the figure bursting through the woods, her shaking arms raised halfway, ready to fight. But then Kristoff appeared, his face a mix of relief and urgency.
Anna! I heard yelling. What happened?
But Anna said nothing. She rushed into Kristoff's arms, yanking one last mournful cry from Elsa as she passed through Elsa's body on the ground. Anna sobbed into Kristoff's chest, and he murmured empty reassurances back at her, cradling the crown of her head.
Hey, it's gonna be okay. It'll be okay. We'll find her. She's probably back in Arendelle. She'll come back.
No, Anna wailed, clutching his coat. She's gone. Kristoff, she's gone. Elsa watched as Kristoff led Anna away from the coast. She had failed to save her kingdom, and now she was impossibly, inconceivably invisible to the one person she cared about most. The weight of her isolation pressed down on her, making it hard to breathe. She stayed there, crying softly, her sobs blending with the sound of the waves.
Am I being punished? By whom?
What was she supposed to do now? Anna would be on the move soon. She would need her sister, even if she could not hear her, feel her, see her. Elsa knew she should get up. She had left Anna alone, again, and broken her promise. No matter what happened to Elsa, no matter what would happen to her, she could not leave her sister unprotected again. Something in Elsa's memory clicked. Her eyes narrowed in recognition.
He's going after her.
The man had said.
He's going after all of them. And you're gonna help me stop him.
Elsa stilled where she sat on the rocks, hugging her bloodied knees to her chest, feeling the heavy weight of something sink into her skin. It felt suspiciously like inevitability. Jack found her this way, curled into herself on the shore. The knock was standing guard over her, nudging her shoulder insistently with his muzzle, his hooves in a nearby tidal basin. Elsa didn't look up as Jack floated himself down to the ground, just a few paces behind her and the knock. Nor did she make any movements as the wind and the leaves curled about his face, whispering to him that the people of Arendelle were safe, but devastated, and banding together against the pain. Anna and Kristoff were with the Northuldra, making preparations to embark on their journey back to rejoin their refugee kingdom and find whatever remained of Arendelle. Anna's abject misery and Kristoff's soul-deep worry were stark contrasts to the relieved and bittersweet moods of the lost Arendellian contingent and the Northuldran tribe. Both freed at last, and knowing the full cost of that recompense. Jack chewed on his cheek as he took in the harsh line of her bare shoulders, and the defeated curve of her spine. The fury and outrage that had driven him from the depths of Atahalan in search of this stubborn creature slowly dissipated, cooling into something beneath his skin instead of burning throughout. Jack swallowed down the pain and resentment, and, dare he say it, fear of being trapped, however briefly, in that place, where Pitch's dark shadows still clung to every inch.
I can probably forgive you for that.
Jack dryly called out to her back, noting with mild surprise that she didn't flinch at the sound of his voice.
You know, eventually.
She didn't turn around to face him, taking that as a sign that she no longer considered him a threat. Jack strode around the knock to stand in front of her. He dropped down to get closer to her eye level, But even crouched on the ground, she would still need to look up at him.
How did you find me?
As if in an answer, a gust of wind brushed along her cheek, sending leaves dancing about her shoulders. Jack watched her expression as she looked up at him, at last. Visible trails lined her cheeks, even though they were mostly dried. Jack pushed down uncomfortable, unwanted feelings.
A little leafy told me.
A what?
Her brows furrowed in confusion.
Do you mean... Are you Gale?
Despite himself, Jack scoffed out a chuckle.
Not exactly.
Jack eyed her cheeks, the too bright shine of her eyes. Elsa looked away.
So, you've been busy, after dunking your would-be partner in a hole and running off on your own.
Jack chewed his cheek, letting his cold eyes bore into her.
What happened?
Arendelle has fallen.
Jack kept his face blank.
Your subjects are safe at least, for now.
Elsa nodded. Jack waited, and waited.
What else?
Anna can't see me or hear me.
Fresh tears threatening to spill over, but she held them back.
I'm invisible, somehow.
Jack's eyes widened.
Shit. Well, that's unexpected.
Elsa snapped her gaze back to his. Relenting, Jack shrugged, trying to soften his expression, and awkwardly offering.
I know a thing or two about being invisible. She can't see me either. None of you could. Not until whatever happened to you in Otta Holland. But whatever's happening to you is just the after effects of that. You're still recovering from your little nap, aren't you?
Nap? What are you talking about?
Elsa demanded, exasperated, hurt, exhausted. Jack tried to push down the fire that suddenly flared inside of him again, an anger that returned with a vengeance. He felt his patience wearing thin, fraying at the edges like the seams of his clothes.
We don't have time for this.
He clasped his hand over his mouth, lest he say something he regretted later, and then ran it over his face and through his hair. Muttering beneath his breath, he paced up and down the small stretch of beach under Elsa's harsh, scrutinizing, suspicious gaze, when he caught a glimpse of himself in the small pools of water that had been caught on the shore. With his furrowed brow and deep frown, for a moment, he thought his bitterness could have rivaled Bunnyman's. He quickly swiped his hand over his face, loosening his jaw.
I have got to stop pulling that mean eyebrow thing. I refuse to become that kangaroo. I refuse.
Letting out the deepest breath, he glanced back to Elsa at last, meeting her pale gaze. Had they always been that pale? Like lilacs? And suddenly, all of their shared confusion, apprehension, and fear brought him back to the days of his youth, shortly after his rebirth as a spirit, stumbling around the pond where he had once spent his childhood, just an unremarkable village boy who shirked his chores and joked around too much, and only thought of how he could make his sister laugh. How lost he had been, all alone in that new world he never thought could be so vast. Jack watched as Elsa fidgeted with her hands under his thoughtful gaze. He looked into pale lilacs and realized that was Elsa now, having lost everything she had ever known, thrust into a world beyond her understanding. But at least, she would not be completely alone.
Your Majesty.
He tried again, with a softer tone. He debated calling her by her name again, like he had in the depths of Otta Holland, but maybe that had also thrown her off. He wasn't an expert on royal etiquette, but calling her by her first name was probably too familiar too soon, right?
You froze in there. In Otta Holland. Did you realize?
If what he said had shaken Elsa in any way, she did not show it. Instead, she raised her chin.
I'm aware.
Okay, good, I guess. So, I hope you're also aware that turning into a solid ice sculptor would take a lot out of anyone, Otta Holland powers or not.
Daring to take a step closer, and then crouching down to her eye level.
I know you're used to running the show, and you're not gonna like what I'm about to say, but you shouldn't go running off by yourself like you usually do. And you most definitely can't afford to push help away when it's generously and very patiently being offered to you. You need it. At least until you're back to yourself again.
Elsa's gaze hardened.
What are you?
She glared.
Really?
Jack sighed deeply. It had been a long time since he'd really talked to someone.
Easy, Frost.
He reminded himself.
She doesn't understand. Help her see. And don't make her run away again, you idiots. Look, it's a long story.
Elsa waited. Jack knew she wasn't going to let this go, and she deserved some explanation.
Okay, fine. I'm a spirit called a guardian. 11,000-ish years ago, I was tasked with the responsibility of bringing down one of the most powerful and darkest creatures of the world, Pitch Black. He traveled from my future to a time before this one. And in the battle, well, he and I got trapped here for millennia. The magic he used to travel and the magic I used to follow him back are both gone now, but I was able to imprison him here in the ice and the new magic that Adahalan is made out of. The magic you have.
Elsa blinked.
You can't possibly mean.
Adahalan was created out of whatever happened that night.
Jack pressed, ignoring the confused and perhaps alarmed expression on her face.
I spent the last several thousand years making sure that nothing got out or in of Adahalan. Until last night.
Elsa's eyes widened.
What I did in Adahalan, you said it freed this pitch black creature. You're saying that when I sent my signal to Anna, I freed this pitch?
Jack nodded, then sighed with his whole body.
Unfortunately for us, yes.
But how could I free something supposedly so powerful?
I arrived here too late, and considering you were already a block of ice when I show up, I don't know exactly what happened yet, but whatever you did. The point is, I need your help to drag him back and lock him back in there, preferably before Mother Nature decides she's not in the mood to be patient anymore and ends up being the one to clean up the mess, which will just piss her off more, because then we're both in trouble.
Mother Nature is real?
Very real. And you do not want to meet her when she's angry. Trust me.
Jack stood and held out a hand to help her, but Elsa did not take his hand or move to get up off the ground. She was struggling with the weight of the revelations, half of which she still did not understand.
How can I possibly trust you?
She asked quietly, desperately. Jack met her gaze, his eyes intense and sincere.
I don't know, but can't you feel it?
Instead of answering him, she swept her gaze down his body, taking in the sight of his staff, his cloak, his bare feet. He forced himself not to shift in place.
So, what are your powers then?
Skeptical curiosity edging into her voice.
You can fight?
Jack allowed a smirk, an expression he had not worn for a long, long time, chuckling dryly.
Yeah, I can fight.
Elsa noted his grin with no small measure of impatience or mistrust.
With your shepherd's staff.
Jack took in the sight of her dubious expression and let out another perplexed, exasperated scoff laugh.
Oh, it's not just a staff. It transforms. And excuse me, Your Majesty, but in case you didn't realize, I managed to track you down with nothing more than leaves in the wind.
Feeling particularly emboldened and defiant, and if he was honest, an urge to showboat at least a little.
And I can also do this.
He rose up into the air and perched himself effortlessly atop the crook of his still upright on its own staff.
And a dozen other things. But we'd be here all day, and we really don't have the time.
Elsa's wide-eyed, disbelieving look was a sweet reward for banter-deprived Jack. But before he pushed any further, he caught himself.
Slow down, Jack. She's not them.
Jack sighed.
Sorry. I should show you something.
Without warning, Jack extended his arm and opened his palm, revealing the smooth, pale skin of his hand. A chill emanated from his fingertips, and the air around him began to shimmer with an iciness. Elsa's eyes widened as a soft blue light pulsed from the center of his palm, growing brighter. The temperature around his hand dropped rapidly, and tiny ice crystals formed in the air, swirling around his hand in an intricate dance. The ice magic coalesced into a brilliant, glowing sphere, hovering just above his palm. It radiated a cold so intense it seemed to burn, the raw power of winter condensed into a tangible form. Jack's gaze was unwavering, his connection to the magic absolute. Elsa's whole face was slack with shock. Just because he'd almost forgotten his center did not mean that he hadn't improved his skills over the past 11,000 years or so.
You don't play jailer to the big bad without learning a thing or two along the way.
Are you? You're like me?
Well, sorta.
Jack tilted his head to the side, releasing the orb, allowing the molecules to resume their original form. He was amused to see the slightly crestfallen look on Elsa's face when it finally disappeared. Jack nearly lost his train of thought.
Well, you already know that your powers probably come from Autoholland and nature. We figured out that much, at least, from all this mess. I'm known as Jack Frost. Mine comes from the Man in the Moon.
Elsa lifted herself off the ground, wincing at the bloodied scrapes on her hands and knees and ignoring his outstretched hand, in favor of staring at him in alarm.
There is a man in the moon?
Technically he lives on the moon, but that story is really more complicated than we really have time for right now. The important bit is that each of the Guardians were appointed by Manny, the moon guy, and we each have different centers that power our magic.
And yours is ice.
Technically, it's fun.
Elsa's confused stare and arched brow did not help his confidence.
Okay, so I know it doesn't really sound like much help right now, but that's not the point. To help fulfill my guardian duties, I can control and manipulate snow, ice, frost, the cold.
Elsa's eyes narrowed.
Where did you say you came from?
Technically I got here 11 or so thousand years ago, and to be honest, I sort of slept through a couple thousand of those, but originally I'm from, the future.
Your spirit guardian from deep in the future, who is trapped here for millennia, whose magic is to create fun, and you were tasked with capturing the core of darkness?
You know what? Forget the fun, okay? It's not even relevant right now.
You're the one who broached the issue, and quite frankly, do you even hear yourself right now? Just tell me about this pitch and how you propose we stop him.
Fine.
In their frustration, their faces had gone much closer, too close. Jack stepped back when Elsa's suspicious glare lingered too long on the scar over his eye. He took a deep breath and leveled his tone.
Pitch has had a millennia to plan his escape. He's been luring spirits of mortals, including you, to his prison for ages. Including himself. His past self, I mean. Originally, he was using the voice of someone he knew. Whoever's voice he was using this time was clearly targeting you.
You can't seriously be implying that siren call I heard was his doing.
Sorry. Probably shouldn't have dropped another bomb like that.
A what?
Anyway, that's not the point. Whatever happened to you in there was meant to happen. We know that. At this point, it doesn't matter that he was the one that was calling to you. Because you had a destiny to fulfill, and you fulfilled it. And now he's escaped. We need to spend our very limited time figuring out what his next steps are.
You don't already know?
Look, just because I fought him a bunch and was his jailer for a couple thousand years doesn't mean I can read his mind.
No, I mean, isn't it obvious?
Now, Jack did snap.
Okay, prodigal shadow hunter, fill in the blanks for the simpleton fun guy, will you?
He wants an army.
Elsa insisted, as cold dread sank down his spine.
Right? To enact his revenge for his imprisonment? And wouldn't he still want to return to your proper time?
Jack shook his head, tightening his jaw.
That second bit's impossible. The magic that brought us here was definitely irrevocably lost. We're stuck here until we die. Or until we catch up with our future selves.
It was a thought he tried not to dwell on. From the look on Elsa's face, he could tell that it wasn't nice for her to think about either. Her eyes were so bright and clear. He turned his gaze to the sky, running a hand through his wind-swept hair.
So, if he cannot rule in his own time, he of course would want to take control of this one. At least in the meantime.
Alright, so, if you're a pissed off spirit of nightmares and darkness who's been imprisoned in magical ice for 11 millennia, and you wanted to recruit an army fast, what would you do?
If you mean corrupt an army, then where better to start with the 4 core elemental spirits responsible for the well-being of nature?
Jack slapped his palm to his forehead.
And sweep them right out from under Mother Nature, leaving her no choice to go after him, leading her straight to him. Damn, you're clever.
Jack glared at her.
I'd usually appreciate that, but right now, it's just really, really bad news bears.
What do bears have to do with this?
Forget it. Come on. Do you prefer bridal style or piggyback?
I beg your pardon?
Did you develop flying abilities after you turned into an icicle?
For a brief, strangely adorable moment, Elsa appeared as if she wasn't sure.
No?
Alright then. We gotta move fast, and Jack Frost Airways is open for business. Should I carry you on my chest, or would you rather ride on my back?
Elsa's delightful, indignant blush was an unexpected balm to 11,000 years of mere memories to sustain him. It even helped quiet the little insistent nagging voice that warned him that he was stretching Elsa's trust. She didn't know, after all, that he could easily have flown her alongside him with the simple act of holding her hand.
I need to have both my hands free anyway.
He reasoned.
We'll both be safer this way. Besides,
Jack smirked, extending his arm in invitation, as Elsa warily looked on.
she'll be back to her old life soon. And I'll be back alone. Consider it a trust-building exercise.
He offered. For a long moment, Elsa simply looked at him, reading whatever it was that she saw on his face. He ignored the thrill in his blood when she slowly nodded her cautious acceptance and reached for his hand. Sincerely uncomfortable with the thought of allowing him any further opportunity to see the expressions on her face, Elsa opted for holding onto his back. All in all, she thought she was doing a remarkable job of hiding the fact that she had never been in such a vulnerable position, not even as a child. But if they were going to reluctantly work together and chase after this nightmare demon, and if Elsa was going to have any chance at collecting her thoughts against the onslaught of all that she had learned and seen and suffered in the past few days alone, then she couldn't allow him to see her face. At first, Elsa tried not to cling too tightly to his back or shift her weight. She tried to stay a respectful distance, but it was impossible with all of the twists and turns he was doing as he led them over the vast forest and into the open countryside.
Is that really necessary?
She hissed into the air beside his ear, tightening her hold around his broad shoulders because he left her no choice. She could feel his smirk, even if she couldn't see it.
Sorry, Your Majesty. We're in a bit of a hurry. And a storm is brewing, if you didn't notice.
Unfortunately, she had. The sky was gray with looming, ominous clouds.
Is that him?
Maybe. A little ballsy for him to be out already since it's not even close to sunset. And it's only his first day out. But maybe he got impatient.
Or maybe he saw an opportunity and he took it. That's where the dam's supposed to be.
Shit. That's where the Earth Giants are. Your sister already took down the dam. In fact, that might have been what woke you up. Since Runar's wrongs against the Northuldra and the Enchanted Forest were righted.
Elsa leaned forward, peering down at his profile.
How do you know these things?
Unable to help himself, Jack smirked.
Well, I'm something of a king myself, you know.
Elsa raised a dubious brow.
Is that so? Over what exactly?
The leaves. And the wind too, but she doesn't like it when I say that.
Is this one of those jokes you told me you like to do? As the guardian of fun?
Please, my jokes are way better than that.
Jack shook his head with a mischievous smile he hadn't worn for a while.
No, Gale really doesn't like being reminded that I'm the boss. But it's true. That's a cute name for her, by the way.
Jack?
Elsa.
After a moment of relishing in her icy stare, he finally continued.
I am being serious, though. The wind tells me... well, the leaves too. They're like my helpers. It's complicated. But it's a bit like a... what are those things called again? Anyway, doesn't matter. They haven't been invented yet. The point is that whenever something happens, they report to me. And they can send messages for me too. They let me keep track of what's going on.
Elsa's eyes narrowed.
How long exactly have you been watching over me?
Hey, save the suspicion for the Nightmare King. I only found out about you, actually, when you passed through the Enchanted Forest Mist. You weren't supposed to be able to do that, by the way. Or so Mother Nature and I thought, anyway.
Elsa pondered his words.
But I was able to? Because I'm connected to Atahalan?
Yeah, probably, but that's a mystery for later. Preferably when there's not a nightmare demon on the loose.
Jack Frost. Guardian of fun, jailer of fear, king of leaves. Anything else?
Mysterious hunter, charming prankster, devilishly handsome winter spirit. But that'll do for now. Look.
Jack instructed, grim-faced, and hoisting Elsa higher on his hips. Elsa did not shriek.
We got incoming.
There, at the trailhead by the dam, was the Arendellian contingent and a small group of Northuldran people, in their sleigh and with their many reindeer, preparing to head toward the ruins of Arendelle and the refugee camp, and crying out in fear at the 3 towering earth giants, their rocks blackened. Dark shadows clung to the giants' every agitated movement. Their warbling cries were broken with eerie, haunting suffering. Elsa's heart clenched in her chest at their pain.
We're too late.
She whispered, clutching his shoulders more tightly, fear gripping her heart.
Not yet.
Jack sent a burst of power, sending the giants staggering back, toppling onto the trees from the force of the wind.
You're gonna have to call to them. They need to recognize you as somehow connected to Ada Holland.
Wait, what about Anna?
I'll hold them off while you send up an ice wall behind us to block them from going after them. Shoot it up once they get far enough along the trail.
Fear crept into Elsa's veins. The memory of Arendelle's destruction was too fresh, too raw.
I will.
Keep an eye on them. And hang on!
Elsa desperately clutched her arms around his chest and wrapped her legs around his waist, giving him full control of both his arms as he flung them through the sky. Elsa's unbound hair whipped around her face, obscuring her vision, but she didn't dare let Anna or Kristoff out of her sight for a mere moment.
Olaf. Where is Olaf?
Jack thrashed in the air. If Elsa slowed him down, he didn't show it. But just as quickly as they began, Elsa realized that the giants would not respond to her the way that the knock had the night before.
They can't sense me,
She said, close to his ear.
Whatever Pitch is doing to corrupt them, they're losing their connection to nature. He's darkened their powers and silenced the bond.
Figures. He's really good at that, unfortunately. Okay, plan B. Focus on the wall. We'll figure out how to heal them later, but for right now, we need to trap them from going any further, in any direction.
All right. Just a bit more.
Elsa begged, watching the travelers escape closer and closer to safety. Elsa couldn't even see Anna's hair. She must have been wearing a cloak. Elsa pushed down her fear and focused. As soon as the contingent cleared the enchanted forest and out into the open, Elsa cried out.
They're clear! They've made it out of the forest!
She yelped as he dropped 20 feet in the air, clutching him tighter.
Face the trail so I can build the wall.
Okay, but be quick. I don't want to leave my back to them any longer than I have to.
With one final wave of wind, Jag twisted mid-air to allow Elsa an unrestricted view of the clearing. Elsa focused, one of her hands outstretched as she tried to summon her ice magic. She could feel the familiar cold energy gathering in her palm, but when she tried to release it, nothing happened. Panic began to rise in her chest as she tried again, willing the ice to form, but her powers remained dormant.
Come on.
She whispered desperately, thrusting her hand forward.
Please work.
Jack glanced back at her, his expression strained.
What's wrong?
I can't. My powers aren't working.
What do you mean they're not working?
I don't know. They just... Jack, look out!
Elsa cried out as Jack swerved to the side just in time. Her hand had been outstretched in a futile attempt to use her powers, so her legs painfully clenched around his waist, forcing herself to remain connected, and when she urgently latched her arms around his neck and chest, her face ended up pressed into his neck and shoulder, braced against the wind left behind by the force of the darkened giant's mighty paw. She willfully ignored the impropriety.
Be offended later. Just survive. What is wrong with you?
Damn it! We don't have time for this. Try again.
Elsa nodded, her heart pounding. She focused harder, trying to push past the block in her magic. She reached deep within herself, searching for the source of her power. She could feel it, buried beneath layers of fear and doubt. With a final, desperate effort, she pulled at it, willing the ice to come forth. She could feel some energy swirling inside her, but something was wrong. Only a few sputtering sparks of snowflakes took shape. Not only was it as if something was preventing it from escaping, but the strength of it too. Where once she had caged a tempest, now she only felt the gentlest of drops.
Jack, it's not working!
New plan.
Jack landed on the ground, setting Elsa down gently, shouting,
Focus!
Before flying back into the fray. He summoned powerful gusts of wind, creating a barrier of his own to slow the giant's advance. The effort was immense, and Elsa could see the strain on his face.
Come on, Elsa.
She whispered to herself, closing her eyes and taking a deep breath.
You can do this. You have to do this.
She concentrated on the feeling of the ice, the way it used to flow effortlessly from her hands. She pictured the ice wall in her mind, strong and unyielding, protecting her people, and, a tiny voice whispered, protecting her giants, too.
Please.
Elsa begged as the magic stuttered into nothing. She was losing the thread, and the giants were nearing the edge of the tree line.
Ha!
With a fierce cry, Jack thrust his staff forward, glowing with energy. A massive wall of ice erupted from the ground, easing upward in a solid block of white, extending for miles in both directions, towering over the giants who roared in fury and being thwarted from their path, until the ice expanded around them in a complete circle, caging them inside. Giants slammed into the ice wall, they held firm, the shimmering surface resisting their force. Elsa watched in awe as Jack's power surged, thickening the barrier, strong enough to hold back the corrupted giants, even at the cost of the nature it overtook as it grew and grew. The giants roared in frustration, their dark forms battering against the ice. Jack gritted his teeth, his arms trembling with the effort.
Elsa, any time now will be great.
Sudden recognition and understanding roiled through her, followed quickly by terror and the urge to be sick.
Jack!
She called, her eyes wide.
Something's wrong. I think it weakened my powers.
Jack's eyes widened, so much that she could see the whites completely surrounding the blue, and then launched himself toward her just in time to narrowly miss the kick of a giant's foot. In a blink, he'd lifted her into his arms and sprang into the air, swerving left and right to avoid the onslaught of darkened giants who had given up slamming into the wall and were doing their best to knock them from the sky. Elsa held onto Jack's neck and curled in on herself, making herself as small a target as possible as Jack rose even higher. When at last they had slipped past the extent of the giant's reach, Jack took his staff in one hand and sent a surge of magic down toward the barrier, gritting his teeth as he urged the ice to grow and grow, shifting upward and inward into a domed enclosure, well out of the giant's wingspan, trapping them inside entirely. Elsa stared in shock and awe at the speed and strength of Jack's creation.
He really is like me.
The muffled roars of the corrupted giants reverberated through the thick ice, but the barrier was so thick that it was hard to hear them. Instead, the only sounds were Jack and Elsa's harsh breaths, intermingling with the cold autumn air above the enchanted forest. They stared down at the dome, at the stark white prison against the golds and coppers and earthy tones of the mountain. And in the next breath, Jack's face snapped towards hers, startling her into clutching more tightly to his neck. Still panting, clearly drained, Jack's eyes narrowed, his scar slanting with the furious furrow of his brows.
Clearly, we have a problem.
As Elsa and Jack flew toward their next destination, back into the thick of Northuldran territory, Elsa struggled to describe this instinctive understanding that had rooted itself in her. She had impeccable control. These powers were not ignoring or resisting her. They had been tampered with.
But how do you know that?
Jack demanded again. Elsa leaned her back into his shoulder in an attempt to prevent her hair from hitting his face too badly. She needed to braid it as soon as they touched down.
I can feel it. When I discovered that I was the fifth spirit,
What?
or rather that it's part of me, it's as if hints of those powers from the fifth spirit have awoken and risen to the surface now. And there's barely anything left of my ice magic inside of me.
But there is something. Of the ice?
Yes, it's just buried. Perhaps that's why Anna cannot see me? Because I'm closer to the spiritual side of the bridge now than the human side?
Elsa peered up at his face, but he was staring stoically straight ahead.
Jack?
Jack glanced down at her, but kept his face trained straight ahead as they flew. She could tell that he was still tired after the battle against the corrupted giants.
Maybe. Rule number 1, Elsa. One freaking problem at a time. Also, best to share all your earth-shattering news up front, before we fly into battle. But we'll have to come back to the fifth spirit bit later.
Elsa's eyes narrowed.
You are tackling multiple problems at once.
Yeah, well that's me. And currently, I have all my powers. And I know how to control them. You better just focus on figuring out what's going on inside you and let me know what you can do, so I can actually plan something that doesn't end up with us being nightmare fodder.
Elsa refused to gulp. However, a gnawing thought that was eating away at her.
Are you upset with me?
Jack startled so badly that he slipped from his flight path, dropping several feet lower than they were before. Elsa, again, most certainly did not shriek.
What? Elsa, no. Why would I be... Okay, well, trapping me in Autumn aside, I'm not angry at you for how that fight went down. And especially not after having your powers weakened. That's not your fault. That's Pitch.
I hate feeling so helpless.
Elsa's brows furrowed in frustration and dismay. This was just another problem, and she needed to solve it.
Whatever happened to my powers is putting us both in danger. For most of my life, I was used to my powers being dangerous. Because back then, before Atahalan, I had more power than I knew what to do with. But now, when I actually needed its raw strength, I don't have it. I'm not used to this kind of irony.
He glanced over his shoulder at her.
Elsa, I may not have grown up in a castle, or know what it's like to lead a kingdom, but I'm guessing perfection is something of a standard. Am I right?
Stunned by his sudden thoughtfulness, she nodded. Jack cast his gaze forward once more.
Not even God's perfect, Elsa, so I sure as heck don't expect you to be.
Is that what he is?
It was easy to forget that this surly, irritable, unpredictable being was in fact thousands of years old. And perhaps it was a trick of the light, but at that moment Jack did seem not quite mortal. Once the adrenaline subsided, Elsa recognized the tiny speck of warmth in her chest, aimed toward her reluctant partner. Gratitude. She would have thanked him by now, but the timing hadn't felt right. Jack was still too agitated, and she was pretty sure she was still, at least slightly, annoyed with his brash behavior. As Elsa and Jack soared through the air, the wind whipping around them, she heard something unexpected, a soft, barely audible humming. It took her a moment to realize that the sound was coming from Jack, rather than the wind around her. Her eyes widened in surprise. She hadn't expected this impatient, sarcastic creature to be the type to hum, and especially not now, amidst all the chaos. The melody was all too familiar, a tune that tugged at her raw heartstrings with its haunting beauty and painful memories. It was the lullaby her mother used to sing to her, the one the Northuldra knew, the song of Atahalan. Hearing it now, from Jack, of all spirits, was both comforting and disconcerting. She'd just learned the truth of the lullaby only last night. And, perhaps equally astounding, singing was something private to Elsa. Something shared among friends and family, and, if the time called for it, among her people. Yet here Jack was, humming the lullaby under his breath as they carved out a path in the sky, as if it were the most natural thing in the world, right where she could hear him. Unable to contain her curiosity, Elsa leaned closer to him, her voice tinged with wonder.
Jack, what are you humming?
Jack glanced at her, a soft smile playing on his lips. He didn't miss a beat, as if he had been expecting the question.
It's a song I learned a long time ago.
His voice carrying easily over the wind. Without hesitation, he sang a few bars of the melody, the haunting notes floating in the air.
Yes, she will sing to those who hear it in her song. All magic flows, but can you brave what you most fear? Can you face what the river knows?
It was the lullaby, the very same one, but instead of just feeling relief at being told the truth, there was an added layer of surprise and something else she couldn't quite name. Hearing Jack sing it felt intimate, like he was sharing a piece of himself with her. Something she had not expected.
And definitely not right now.
As he finished the snippet of song, he turned his head slightly, catching the look on her face. Mistaking her stunned expression for novelty, he chuckled.
You never heard it before?
Elsa blinked, struggling to find her voice. She shook her head, both in answer and to clear the fog of emotions his singing had stirred.
No, I have. It's just surprising to hear you sing it.
Jack raised an eyebrow, genuinely intrigued.
Why's that?
Elsa hesitated, then smiled softly.
Singing has always felt personal to me. Something you share with those close to you.
Really?
Yes.
Huh. Alright. Well, I wasn't planning on another trust building exercise so soon, but I guess now is as good a time as any. Sing! Your turn.
I just said it's something private. For family and friends.
Jack clutched his chest dramatically, jostling Elsa and subsequently forcing her to hold onto his back more tightly, which only added fire to her annoyance.
Your Majesty, are we not friends?
Oh, no, you don't. Forget I said anything.
Come on, just a little. A bar, a line, a note.
Shouldn't you be focusing on flying?
I am a magnificent multitasker. Also, what about our trust building exercises?
Is this entire day not a continuous demonstration of trust? Why should we further exercise that which is already being tested?
Well, my second plan was doing trust falls,
What?
but perhaps you'd like to opt for singing instead.
If you think for 1 second that I'm going to let a pushy winter sprite pressure me into singing,
Wait.
Jack came to an abrupt halt, sending Elsa and her words careening deeper into his back, clutching on for dear life.
Do you smell that? The smoke.
Elsa didn't, at first. But the sky continued to darken and the faint smell of smoke reached them both as they finally neared the area where the fire spirit lurked.
he doesn't have the fire spirit yet.
Elsa sighed with relief, but only a little.
Do you think Pitch maybe went after another spirit instead?
No way.
Jack shook his head, expression serious.
If Pitch corrupts a fire spirit, it could cause a wildfire that would be devastating. That's a very specific fear. We need to be quick.
As they approached the area, they could see flickers of light in the distance. Far below them, the ground was charred and the air was thick with the acrid smell of burning wood. The tiny salamander-like fire spirit was darting around frantically, his normally playful demeanor replaced by panic. Elsa's heart lurched in her chest.
There he is.
Jack pointed out, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the area for any further signs of Pitch.
We need to get down there and calm him.
Elsa cried, her heart squeezing in her chest. Through their strengthened bond, Elsa could feel his distress. The trees and the small patch of woods were burning with his orange flames, but the fire was still small. It was still tameable, just as before.
Bruni!
She called softly, knowing deep in her heart that this was his name, even though she had never heard it used before. And
How did I know that?
forcing herself to project a sense of calm when she felt anything but.
It's me. It's us.
Bruni was startled into stillness when Jack landed directly in his path. The mighty little spirit locked his glowing eyes onto hers for a moment. He seemed to recognize her, but then he let out a desperate burst of flame and a terrified shriek, the fire swirling around him in a protective barrier. Elsa and Jack stepped back, blocking their faces with their arms, feeling the heat singe their skin. The torn skin on Elsa's knees, elbows, and palms felt especially raw.
Bruni, it's okay.
She called, hissing in pain at the burning in her bloodied cuts, and unthinkingly she hissed patches of cold over the scrapes and cuts. Jack coughed and started swinging his staff back and forth, putting out the fires with his ice, as quickly as they spread.
We're here to help. It's me, Elsa.
Jack landed beside her, his staff emitting an endless stream of cooling jets that could hardly keep up with the fire.
We need to wrap this up, Elsa!
Resisting the urge to snap back, Elsa focused her energy toward Bruni. She reached out her hand, focusing her mind and spirit not on the weak swirl of ice magic at the center of her being, but rather the tenuous connection binding her to the creature before her. Already, she could see his scales darkening and his eyes shifting colors. Something about the nature of this bond awoke the depleted spark of ice within. Elsa gasped as snowflakes fluttered weakly at her fingertips. Bruni hesitated, the flames around him flickering uncertainly. Jack swore behind her, twirling his staff deftly in one hand and slamming it into the ground, creating a powerful gust of ice-cold winds that extinguished the flames all at once. Frost blossomed and crackled across the clearing, rapidly spreading its erratic, crystalline veins outward in a hiss of rippling, fern-like patterns. Then, as the gust brushed past the leaves among the highest trees, the world fell still, bearing witness in hushed, reverent awe to the power and authority of the Guardian. Elsa hadn't realized that she held her breath until she released it. The underlying current of magic was immense, as deep and mysterious as Ahtohallan itself. Similar to her own at the surface, yet at its roots, nothing alike. She watched the strands of frost creep further outward from the thick, expansive,
Elegant? Gentle?
sprawling blossoms that reached for her in sloping curves to the fern-like branches crawling up the trunks of nearby trees. In the space of a breath, she considered the strange effect the sight of so many erratic, unpredictable branches of ice had on her. She clenched her fists against the immediate urge to correct them, to encourage the fern-like curves to straighten, to nudge the frivolous curls and dendrites and sprawling branches into order. Elsa reminded herself that this artistry, this controlled chaos, was not her doing. So she forced herself to watch the wisps and flutters of Jack's ice without trying to tame them, to accept the natural order as it was. Elsa swallowed.
Jack Frost. The Guardian.
Slowly, Bruni's breathing began to slow, the fire in his eyes fading to a soft glow, and Elsa belatedly realized that he was mirroring her. Her frantic panic had been exacerbating his own, and the quiet in her analytical mind and the steady beating of her heart was now quelling him. Elsa inched closer, speaking soothingly.
That's it.
She murmured, kneeling to the ground.
You're safe now. We're here.
Bruni's eyes glowed brightly, his fear gradually subsiding. He chirped softly, gazing up at Elsa with recognition.
Yes,
she murmured, stroking Bruni's head with the tip of her pinky, calm at last. She ignored Jack as he dramatically fell to the charred grass and dirt beside them, panting hard, lying on his back. Elsa instead smiled down at Bruni. Jack's antics were a little much, but she figured that he probably deserved the chance to let off some steam, she supposed.
I know who I am now,
she reassured Bruni.
Do you know?
Bruni nodded, adoration in his gaze.
That's good.
Feeling a wave of sadness overtake her at the thought of leaving him again so soon.
I know you're scared. Do you trust me? Okay, good. I need to keep you safe and hidden. I'm going to create a shelter for you. I need you to stay inside, okay?
Bruni continued nodding, eyes wide. Jack watched from his back on the ground as Elsa scooted to the base of a tree trunk, coalescing all of her magic, invigorated by the bond, into her right hand, with Bruni watching from his perch in her left. Elsa placed her hand to the ground, summoning the meager, icy energy within her. Slowly, a beautiful structure of ice began to form at the base of the tree trunk, symmetrical, sturdy, sinking into the ground even as it grew skyward with equal length, streamlined, flawless, about the length of her hand. Its walls were thick and shimmering, easily hidden by leaves and underbrush. The ice shelter would keep Bruni safe and comfortable, allowing him to rest without the threat of shadows. Inside was bright with Elsa's magic, and all the love she'd poured into its walls.
When it's safe outside,
lowering him to the opening she'd left for him,
I'll erase it, okay? He won't get you while you're in here.
She could feel Jack's gaze still burning into her form from where he lay on the ground at his back. Bruni nuzzled one final goodbye to Elsa and then slipped inside her shelter, contentedly nestling himself into a small curve and settling in for a long, long nap.
I'll see you soon.
The ghost of a smile on her lips, as she used the bond with the spirits to call forth the ice needed to seal the path, effectively protecting Bruni inside. Covering the shelter with leaves and rocks and bundles of sticks was quick work at the height of autumn. Jack watched.
Pitch could come back.
He warned distractedly.
Even his past self, too. From this timeline. Who is arguably less dangerous than somewhere on the other side of the world right now? But definitely still annoying. So...
When Elsa glanced back at him, brushing her hands clean of dirt and debris, Jack was still observing her from his spot on the ground, but he'd lifted himself up onto his elbows.
You can still find the fire spirits. Are you sure you want to leave them behind?
Elsa ignored the grim pessimism underlying his tone and considered the warning it intended. After a moment's deep thought, Elsa knew her answer.
He'll be safe.
She shook her head, determined.
If we brought him with us, we'd only be putting him in harm's way. Pitch won't be able to find him here.
Jack's chin dropped closer to his chest as he stared up at her incredulously.
You made him an icebox. How's that going to stop the Master of Shadows?
It's not just an icebox. It's not just ice. It's more than that. Something happened on Atahalan. My magic, it's not just mine anymore. Or maybe it's not just Atahalan's.
You really think you're the fifth spirit?
Elsa lifted her chin, narrowing her eyes.
I know it. Can't you feel it?
Jack stared at her.
I don't know how to explain it.
Elsa looked down at him, exasperated. from where she still knelt on the ground.
The reason I've been able to connect with the knock, with Bruni or Gale, even if I didn't arrive in time to protect the Earth Giants, I can feel there's something awake inside me that wasn't before.
She knew what she was saying wasn't making sense, but she was telling the truth. Pitch may have stolen from the magic that had rested in her core for her entire lifetime, but in gaining her true self, she also gained something that couldn't be stolen. At least, not by Pitch.
I just need you to trust me.
Great. Shall we try the trust falls then?
Jack.
Jack's jaw clenched. He looked away. Elsa watched him lift himself up and brush himself off. He kicked up his staff from the ground and into his hand. The motion was flawless, practiced. Planted its foot in the dirt, and then met her gaze. Elsa also stood and shifted to face him more fully, waiting.
All right.
He conceded.
Rule number 2. You want me to trust you? It's a two-way street.
Elsa swept her gaze over the hard planes of his cheeks, his jaw, his nose. The scar seemed old and fresh at the same time, an ancient wound that had never quite faded. His eyes were hard, but Elsa could recognize, now, what else lay within them.
I climbed onto your back and let you carry me into the air. Into battle.
She pointed out, voice wry and brow arched high.
Save Anna. I probably have to trust you more than any other creature alive right now.
One of those rare smirks twisted his mouth upward, ever so slightly. It was missing its earlier sharpness, transforming his face into something almost youthful, warm.
Well, I'm not really alive, per se.
He quipped, as Elsa tried her best to parse through that.
But we'll add that to the list of stories for later.
Despite its very unqueenly nature, she allowed herself to roll her eyes. Then, all of a sudden, anxiety crept in. Jack noticed immediately, but said nothing. He merely stepped closer, watching her face.
My powers. I can feel them again. Almost, after connecting with Bruni, but it feels like so much is still missing. And with them, I can build palaces, create blizzards, tame the sea itself, but I've never...
You've never been in a real battle with a real enemy before.
Elsa glared up at him at what sounded like an accusation, but years of manners and etiquette training allowed her to keep her composure.
You say that as though it's regrettable.
Jack looked down at her, perplexed.
I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I am saying it's inconvenience. Especially since you're still not fully charged.
Charged in what way?
Bad future word choice, okay?
So what are you saying exactly? That I should stand aside and stay out of your way?
She could practically hear the gears turning in his head as he carefully considered his next words, biting his tongue, warring with what he was saying and what he meant. It was uncomfortably familiar. He took a breath, looking at her as if he could simply move his thoughts directly into her mind.
No, Elsa. I just don't want you to get hurt following me into battle. If you've never been in battle, you don't know how to protect yourself. Even if you do call your powers back, do you really feel like you're gonna know how to use them against a monster like Pitch?
Elsa's indignant fury gave way to thoughtful realization. She whispered, like a revelation and an accusation all in one.
You do?
Wait. Listen. Your Majesty, Elsa. Wait, no. I've had years to train, eons, and a few centuries of fighting stuff before I was even trapped here.
And who better to teach me?
Elsa, time isn't exactly on our side right now.
A thoughtful pause.
You told me that I am to help you fix this. I can't help you if you don't show me how.
Even as Jack glared down at her with his stubborn gaze, she knew she had won.
Alright. But don't expect me to go easy on you.
That would defeat the purpose.
Fine, but if you start whining,
He was clearly delighted by her outrage.
I'm gonna remind you that this was your terrible idea.
Jack, if you would begin, please.
Fine. First lesson. Don't get distracted by the charming mentor when you're supposed to be focusing on the scary bad guy.
Jack, in this scenario, you are the scary bad guy.
I resent that.
And then, with no small hint of mischief, blasted a wave of ice at her face. Elsa blocked it with an offended huff, and her indignation only skyrocketed as Jack floated backward into the air, peering down at her with a decidedly smug grin on his decidedly arrogant face. Regardless, Elsa had the sneaking suspicion that he just might have, in fact, gone easy on her. Jack dodged a weak, too weak, snowball aimed at his head. All mischief aside, this situation did not bode well. He floated back and forth, barely even moving at half speed, and watching as Elsa struck and struck and struck again. Her strength was definitely not anywhere near what he'd seen in the forest the day before, and nothing like what Gale had told him of Elsa's taming of the knock.
What happened to her?
Jack mulled over her theory of being the fifth spirit as he landed back on the ground. She mistook it for easing up on her if the angry slant to her brow was any indication, an assumption no doubt solidified when he dodged her attacks with one hand on his staff as he pondered the implications of where her ice magic had gone. Or come from, for that matter.
Remember, focus on control.
He called over to the other side of the clearing, floating above a wall of spiked hoarfrost.
It's not just about raw power.
I know that!
Yikes, sore subject, maybe.
Are you concentrating? Don't go looking for the magic. Focus on feeling it.
The charred clearing became their makeshift training ground, dotted in turn with autumn leaves, hoarfrost, and snow. The air was crisp and cold and filled with an energy that made Jack's skin tingle with anticipation, even if Elsa hadn't managed to land any good hits yet. She was getting better at tapping into her residual ice powers, though, in spite of this stupid block. Even at this reduced level of force, every instinct screamed at him to protect her, to keep her safe. He had to actually remind himself that this is what he was doing. Or at least, trying to. Elsa suddenly summoned a ball of icy energy in her hand, a decent one this time, which she fired at Jack. He deflected it with a swipe of his staff, sending it harmlessly back into the bushes. He raised an eyebrow, unimpressed.
Don't worry about hurting me. I can handle it.
Elsa narrowed her eyes, a determined set to her jaw. She called forth another burst of ice, this time with more intensity. The icicles shot towards Jack, who dodged with a swift leap. Barely. He landed gracefully on his feet with a smirk.
Now that's more like it.
Jack allowed Elsa a single moment of pride, laughed inwardly when she actually smirked back, and ruthlessly added,
But you're still too predictable. You're giving yourself away when you stare intensely at the spot you're aiming for.
She got better, but a lot of coaching was still needed. It was a tricky balance. He wanted her to be safe, not make her feel like a burden. Jack offered tips and corrections as they continued sparring, sometimes to Elsa's displeasure and at others to her utter exasperation. She was listening to him though, which was nice. Feeling magnanimous, he spent some time briefly demonstrating techniques for dodging and countering, without the aid of light, and showed how he moved when he created shields or blasts of cold air. Elsa mimicked his movements and, despite her earlier sass, focused on refining her control and letting her power flow out instead of trying to dig for it. He took a particularly brutal hit to his shoulder after he'd let loose another smirk. Elsa was glaring at him through fierce eyes.
What did I say about getting distracted by your charming mentor while you're busy fighting your own battle?
Elsa huffed. He could tell that although she was pleased with her progress, she was more annoyed by his attitude.
Take a number.
But then she summoned a flurry of snowflakes around her, markedly stronger than before, if still not as strong, creating a swirling barrier that obscured her from view. Jack squinted, trying to see through the isolated storm. Suddenly, Elsa burst through the snow, propelled by a ramp of ice, a razor-sharp icicle in her hand aimed straight towards his neck. Jack barely had time to react, raising his staff to block her attack. The force of the collision sent them both tumbling to the ground, sending dried leaves and snow flying in all directions. They landed in a heap, Jack on his back with Elsa on top of him, his hands gripping his staff and her eyes pricking into his neck, their faces inches apart. For a moment, there was only the sound of their heavy breathing, the world around them seeming to pause. Elsa's eyes widened as she realized the compromising position they'd ended up in, her cheeks flushing a lovely dark pink. Slowly, and then all at once, Jack became aware of something trickling down his neck.
Elsa?
She jerked to the side, landing in a pile of leaves and scrambling off of his legs, evaporating the ice prick in an instant.
Oh!
She reached for his neck, which he was pretty sure was bleeding a bit, and he caught her wrist in his hand.
I told you not to worry about hurting me.
He reminded her.
Your blood, it's...
Not exactly blood.
Jack smiled ruefully. She leaned back, kneeling on the ground as Jack sat up, releasing her wrist and swiping a hand over the small nick she'd left behind. His hand came away with a trace of blue.
It's a guardian thing.
Elsa considered that in silence for a moment. Her cheeks were completely back to normal. He missed the pink.
So, when you said that you aren't alive...
It's a long story.
Jack brushed it off, because he really didn't want to get into his sob story with her.
I can get hurt.
He pointed to his scar, which he'd caught her looking at more than once.
As you can clearly see from your little storm vortex trick, unless I'm fatally wounded, I'm not dying. Again.
Elsa contemplated his words, while Jack's mind reeled.
So, should we talk about what just happened? Is that awkward? Not talking about it is more awkward, right?
But before he'd had a chance to speak the awkwardness into the air, Elsa brought up another topic he'd really been hoping to avoid.
You said that you and Pitch had a mighty battle, and as a consequence, you created Atahalan, which became his prison.
It's not like I created it.
Jack couldn't help the defensive edge to his tone.
A guardian couldn't create something like that alone, you know? It was a recipe for a perfect storm from everything. Pitch, the spirits, the battle. Just because you think your powers came from Atahalan doesn't mean that they're tainted by the battle or Pitch or anything. Atahalan has as little to do with moon magic through my eyes as it does with Pitch.
But perhaps he's been influencing me regardless.
She pointed out, brows furrowing.
The future version? Or his past self? If this darkening of fear is what he's done all along, then perhaps it's not so much about his role in where my powers came from or hindered them now, but how he shaped them throughout my life.
Is that why you try to do everything on your own?
Elsa looked at him in askance.
I beg your pardon?
Is that why you pushed Anna and the others away? Out of fear?
Her face immediately shuddered, eyes cold and distant in a way he hadn't seen before.
For their safety, to protect them.
That's not all.
Jack wanted to argue.
It's not what Gale says. Whatever, it doesn't matter. It's not my place.
No, go on,
she ordered, leaning back and folding her hands primly in her lap even as her eyes filled with fire.
You've started, so continue. Speak your mind.
Jack considered her. Did she really want to hear the truth? Could she handle the truth?
Fine. You don't think they can handle themselves. They want to be there by your side to help you, but you don't trust them to be able to.
Jack forcefully pushed down painful memories that should have faded long ago.
After everything you've been through, after everything you've learned, you ran off from your own kingdom to chase down a voice. A call you didn't even recognize, looking for someone like you. And at every step of the way, you have separated yourself from the very loved ones that you worked so hard to reunite with only a few years ago.
Elsa's mouth gaped open, scathingly.
And did the wind also tell you too that I recognized in the voice a calling to my very soul? A calling which, regardless of its origins, did in fact lead me to fulfill my destiny. As you have very well pointed out yourself.
Her voice cracked, so she stopped, shocking Jack out of his anger for a brief moment.
And as painful as it was to leave them behind, I had to. I couldn't lose them too.
But at what cost? You worked so hard to be with them. How can you... Do you have any idea what I would give for a...
Jack broke off with a dawning realization on Elsa's perceptive face, biting his tongue. He wanted to say something, to brush it off with a joke or a smirk, to deflect and protect himself as he always did, but the words wouldn't come. He could feel her gaze on the side of his face like a layer of too hot sunshine, burning his cheeks.
Forget it.
He could feel the weight of her gaze on him, heavy and searching, but he couldn't bring himself to meet her eyes. It wasn't her fault, he knew that. She didn't understand the full scope of what he had lost, of what 11,000 years of solitude and duty had done to him. But the realization that she might never truly understand, that she couldn't, gnawed at him. Finally, he took a deep breath, forcing himself to look back at Elsa. The hurt in her eyes mirrored his own.
For what it's worth, I am sorry. In the end, I guess I learned that lesson the hard way.
Jack chewed on his cheek.
I didn't mean to.
With a deep breath, Elsa reset her shoulders, pushing them down and back. When she looked at him again, the light in her eyes was something softer and more determined.
I'll never be able to grasp the concept of living for 11,000 years.
Elsa admitted readily, in a no-nonsense tone that Jack was startled to realize he rather liked.
And I'll never know what it's been like to go through what you've gone through. So I can understand your confusion about my choices. Even as I ask you for the patience that I know you know I deserve.
Elsa's eyes flashed, and Jack remembered that he was listening to the leader of a kingdom.
I was called to Atahalan for a reason. Even if you don't believe that reason yet, you know that I could never have done what I did, or grown as I have, if I had dragged Anna into danger with me. Given your initial reluctance to train me, I know you know exactly what I mean.
As was becoming increasingly the norm, Elsa had a point, and he hated it. He wasn't sure what to say to that, since 11,000 years had done little to rid him of his hatred of losing ground, in any sense of the word. But Elsa's demeanor shifted once more, and an unexpected burden lifted from Jack's shoulders when she looked him in the eye, and allowed him a small, genuine smile.
You know, I must admit, Jack, for the Guardian of Fun, you're not very fun.
Jack's eyes widened in shock, and he instinctively pulled back, a mixture of disbelief and indignation washing over his face. His mouth opened and closed as he searched for a retort, utterly flabbergasted by Elsa's teasing remark, his mind reeling at the unexpected jab. To his utter exasperation, as his heart hammered in his chest and his cheeks grew uncomfortably warm, Elsa's eyes sparkled.
Excuse me? Not very fun? Are you serious?
He stared at her, a mix of outrage and hurt etched across his features.
Do you even know who you're talking to? I'm the literal Guardian of Fun. It is my eternal job to be fun, to make fun. Ugh!
He threw his hands up in the air, gesturing wildly as he continued, clearly offended.
I have been bringing joy and laughter to kids for centuries.
Elsa arched a challenging brow.
All of the children, Jack?
Okay, well, I already told you that I haven't been able to leave the Enchanted Forest for a few millennia. So forgive me if I missed out on a few world tours, okay? Centuries, Elsa.
She simply waited. Jack fumed. He twisted his head to glare at her with what he was certain was some serious side-eye.
How can you say that I'm not fun? Maybe you've been stuck in survival mode for so long that you've forgotten what actual fun looks like.
It could very well have offended her. He did genuinely feel sorry that she had suffered so much during her childhood. She was exactly the kind of person he might have been able to help in another life, in another universe. But instead of getting offended, she merely grinned at him, placing her chin on her knees and considering him like a puzzle, and she'd already figured out all the corner and edge pieces. Jack always hated puzzles. He crossed his arms, huffing slightly, his eyes narrowing as he met her amused gaze.
I'll have you know, I'm a blast at parties.
Elsa, in spite of herself, let out the tiniest grin.
Oh, attend many parties, do you?
He gaped at her in awe. Is she teasing me?
Jack had always, generally, tried to maintain a positive attitude, even through the worst of what's happened to him. But now feelings were surging up that he hadn't felt in a long time.
I'm always messing with the Northuldra and the rest of nature. But when is the last time I actually played around with someone else?
For a moment, he let the idea settle, a slow grin spreading across his face. Then Jack flicked snow at her, a playful glint in his eyes. The snow stuck to the warmth in her cheek, which tinged pink, still such a nice color, as shocked, genuine laughter bubbled out of her, a heartfelt sound that felt foreign but wonderfully warm. But just as quickly, the sound was cut off abruptly, her eyes widening with alarm, and her face falling in dismay, in shame. Jack's playful expression faltered, confusion and concern swiftly replacing the nascent swell of mischief.
Elsa?
She leaned back, blinking rapidly. She whispered something under her breath, more to herself than anything.
Conceal? Don't feel?
He watched her closely, carefully. He could feel her walls going back up.
Elsa, wait, hang on. Don't do that. Don't shut me out. Don't let Pitch get to you.
He wasn't sure how or why, but upon hearing his words, those fortress walls began to crack. He watched them dissipate from one breath to the next.
Elsa, I'm here. Just talk to me, please.
Jack, I can't lose focus. I'm invisible to my sister.
Elsa hissed at the sky, brows drawn, and Jack watched on, surprised and helpless as Elsa's face twisted in frustration, letting her let it all out.
Pitch Black is still out there. I found out the horrible truth about my grandfather yesterday and literally froze as a result. Me! Arendelle's land and castle, my childhood home, are gone. My subjects are refugees. Anna thinks I'm dead. I still don't have all my powers, and I can feel myself falling back into old habits.
She sighed, staring at the frost-edged leaves scattered around them.
I can't stop moving. If I stop, I will think about all that has happened to me, and I won't be able to do what is needed of me.
Jack breathed in, as uncomfortable heat rushed through him, head to toe, his stomach churning with unfamiliar twists.
I get it. No, trust me.
He insisted, when she gave him a disbelieving look.
Believe me, I get it. I've been there. But that's another story for another time.
Elsa stilled for a moment, and Jack felt compelled to fill that silence, just in case she was still listening. After all, he had gotten rather good at talking to himself, pretending that others could hear him.
I know what it's like to run yourself ragged, trying to stop yourself from thinking about all the bad stuff that's happened. And sometimes it works. Sometimes you gotta. Like right now. I'm not judging. Sorry, I don't know if I'm making any... What I want to say is, I didn't mean to imply that I don't care about...
No, I understand. And I'm sorry. I know that it is in your nature to find joy where you can.
Elsa looked up at him with a hard, weary gaze.
And maybe it is in mine too, some days. But not right now. Not when there's so much at stake.
Jack didn't know what to say.
I guess we'll take a rain check.
He said, extra soft, chancing a half-tilted grin. But he knew it was the right call when she returned it.
You're right. We have a job to do. I just thought...
He swept his hand through his hair.
Yeah. Guardian of Fun. Remember? Though maybe a little out of practice.
When Elsa did not immediately reply, so caught up in her thoughts as the weight of reality washed over her, an optimistic smile, a determined light in her eye, but a crease between her brow, Jack sighed.
Hey, I promise. I'll have plenty of time to throw snow at you later.
Elsa's unimpressed brow was a relief and a godsend, as was her...
Oh?
Ah.
Jack grinned more widely.
There it is. Promise. Elsa, after all this is over, all I got is time.
He joked, dry and just a little bit bitter, but he could already feel gravity shifting back into equilibrium, as all the weight of the world that had coalesced around her shoulders was slipping back into the air, and Jack kept his soft grin in place as he moved closer, peering down into her face, willing and ready to do just about anything to keep the light of hope in her eyes.
Hey, we'll take care of it, okay? You're not alone in this.
He thought, but couldn't quite bring himself to say.
Jack?
Yeah?
He leaned closer. Her mouth was in a thoughtful frown, but not a sad one. It was the color of springtime berries, the first brush of color after all the frost thawed.
What is a rain check?
Elsa sighed as Jack finished up his rather confusing, if not oddly endearing explanation of a rain check, and a rather convoluted and rambling explanation of an IOU and whatever strange financial systems were underlying the societies of the future. Elsa didn't have the heart to tell him that Arendelle did have a treasury and promissory notes, since he was really quite determined to explain the wonders of the future to her. And she did still feel a little disappointed that she couldn't reciprocate such a moment of lightheartedness for someone who was so clearly in need of it. Perhaps now was the proper time for that display of gratitude.
Jack, thank you. And not just for saying all that.
And it was really quite alarming how much taller he sat up at those words, how his chest seemed to puff up at the praise. The tiniest quirk curled his grin into something unabashedly pleased with himself.
He's a peacock.
Elsa thought suddenly, forcing back a smile that he wouldn't understand.
But also for coming after me. After I attacked you in Atahalan, when I first saw you. Protecting me when I couldn't access my powers, training me. I suppose I just...
Jack leaned down, trying to read her expression.
You suppose?
I suppose it's just a bit strange that, in spite of training for battle all day with the very real hopes of capturing and disarming this eternal nightmare being, and even though my magic is not at its fullest potential right now, I suppose I'm just not used to the idea of being able to use my powers and not needing to hold back at all. It's just, for so long, I was so used to hurting people.
Suddenly, Elsa heard the memory of Anna's voice, ringing clearly in her ears. If you don't want me to follow you into fire, then don't run into fire!
Oh, Anna.
For a moment, Jack said nothing. He stared down at her, his lips parted in surprise. Elsa waited, doing her best to ignore the awkwardness of his awe, to not think about what impropriety had transpired only minutes before with her sparring victory, but she looked at the scarred face of this being, this man, and took in the unfamiliar sight of the contrite twist to his mouth, of the tightness around his eyes. She could recognize now, standing in the stillness of the enchanted forest, that he was not quite the same as the spirit who so kindly greeted her in the depths of the Atahalan fortress. In his shock and confusion and fear, he had carried himself in such a way and had shouted such impossible truths that Elsa had no choice but to fight and flee. This gregarious, loud, sarcastic, gentle, insufferable, mischievous, brash, considerate, capable, resilient, resourceful, loyal, lonely spirit who was grinning down at her, pretending, for both their sakes, for the moment, that the last few minutes had never happened. The gray of a coming storm was stealing the sunset from the sky before it even had the chance to brush its first pinks and oranges across the horizon. For just a few beats too long, they stared at one another. Elsa surveyed the curve of his brow and the curl of his smirk in the gray evening light, wondering at how she had ended up here in this clearing with a partner she hadn't asked for. Jack's gaze landed on her hair, her eyes, her thoughtful frown, her eyes, her mouth, and to her eyes again. Clearly, 11,000 years had left Jack with very few speechless moments to speak of, and perhaps a few faded manners. He must have seen her thoughts in her eyes, because he asked,
What's so funny?
thinking of how lonely he must have been, and how hopeless it must have all seemed to him during all those years. Not to mention how unused to having a partner in battle he must have been. Elsa softened her gaze and smiled sadly up at him. She could not even begin to fathom a millennium. But 11! Jack stared suspiciously at her mouth, her eyes, and then again at her mouth.
Poor Jack. He probably thinks I'm laughing at him after all. I am grateful that you're here, with me. It must have been very difficult for you, fulfilling this destiny of watching over the prison for as long as you did, until I came along and broke it.
Jack opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Elsa watched and waited, wondering what he would say.
Elsa.
And she stepped forward at the strain in his voice, at the distressed slant of his mouth and the urgency in his eyes.
For so long, I thought...
When I said you must bear the consequences, I admit this is not what I had in mind.
Elsa and Jack stumbled back as a figure emerged from the shadowed forest. Elsa was desperate to see Jack's reaction, but she didn't dare remove her gaze from the woman for one moment. She could feel immense power radiating from her, much deeper, more vast, much older than anything she'd ever imagined, even in the heart of Atahalan.
Mother Nature!
Jack croaked, which was enough to at least force Elsa's gaze. She snapped toward him in alarm.
Where?
I am aware of your efforts.
Mother Nature looked only at Jack, but Elsa hardly took it as a slight. If anything, she was relieved to avoid that thunderous gaze.
Do you have the slightest understanding of how woefully unprepared we are for this? Immediately upon his escape, he took to the elements, as if he didn't already have my attention.
We discovered the key to potentially purifying the corruption. It's the bond shared between the 4 elemental spirits in the bridge, the 5th spirit. Elsa, it might be her. She can bring them back from...
You are too slow.
She thundered, and when her gaze at last befell Elsa, Jack stepped in front of her, shielding her from the brunt of Mother Nature's glare. Elsa looked at the tall shoulders of the guardian in front of her, at once both deeply grateful and inexplicably offended.
How do you imagine he has been able to anticipate your every move? How?
It's Pitch. He spent millennia scheming.
Mother Nature swept away from him, clicking her tongue, shocking Jack into stillness. Elsa watched warily as Mother Nature composed herself.
Somehow, he knows. He has ways. Find out how he's able to cut you off at the pass, or he will overtake you.
5th Spirit Elsa knew nothing about Mother Nature, but Her Majesty Elsa, Queen of Arendelle, knew quite a bit about reading people. This wasn't just a quest to save the world. This was politics. Elsa carefully stepped out from behind Jack and faced Mother Nature fully, who ignored her at first. That was just fine. Elsa could leverage being underestimated.
With your blessing, Jack and I can protect the other spirits from being corrupted,
she announced, with all the regal bearing the declaration required.
We may not prevent each one, but with this bond awoken, I can bring them back. Without his army, Pitch will be forced to abandon his plan, maybe even forced to hide in the shadows until he's ready to rise again.
That is the last thing you want. If he goes into hiding, it could be decades, centuries, until he emerges again. Your kingdom will never be free from his clutches. And Jack, I hope you've grown fond of hunting, my boy.
Jack glared. The quick glance she spared him was enough to reveal that this was not a nickname he appreciated.
Then we must act quickly, before he has the chance.
Mother Nature turned to stare down her nose at her, and her eyes narrowed.
You may have saved the people of your kingdom, but let's not forget how you disrupted the balance of the seasons, freezing the fjord in midsummer 3 years ago. An act that still echoes in nature's rhythm.
Beside her, Jack fidgeted. Elsa met Mother Nature's gaze, standing tall even as echoes of once healed guilt crawled along her arms.
I understand the consequences of my actions, and I've spent every day since trying to restore that balance. I'm here to make things right, not just for Arendelle, but for all of us. I give you my word that I will do all I can to heal that which I have hurt, and to ensure Pitch is returned.
But Jack was offended, sweeping his staff out wide.
It's not her fault. She didn't even know what was happening.
Jack.
Nearly imperceptibly, Mother Nature's expression softened, her eyes still sharp with lingering irritation as Jack bit his tongue.
Very well, young queen.
She peered down at them, ice and fire and storms and solid rock in her gaze.
But know this. Restoring balance is not a task to be taken lightly. One more misstep, and the consequences will be dire. Consider this your final chance.
Elsa forced herself to nod, to not swallow, to not show a shred of weakness, and to say,
I understand.
Yeah. Memo received.
With one final scalding glance of warning to Jack, Mother Nature resettled.
Now, what other reasons have you for remaining in this forest? The Nock is giving merry chase in the storm I've conjured on the dark sea, and is awaiting your command. Where is the wind spirit?
Elsa felt the weight of Mother Nature's gaze lift as she turned to stare impatiently at Jack, who only looked back in confusion and alarm.
I sent her to you.
A cold sense of dread began to crawl along Elsa's skin.
After the battle with the Earth Giants, Gale, the wind spirit, was supposed to find you and report.
Mother Nature's eyes widened.
No!
Suddenly, she raised her arms, and in a crash of thunder and a swirl of her cloak, Mother Nature commanded,
Bind them!
and disappeared into the storm above. Thank you guys so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the fanfiction, and yes, it is in fact finished. But I won't be doing the whole thing here because I think that would be a little bit insane, and we all know I'm like the most stable and sane person there ever was, so you can read the rest of it on AO3 under More Than You Know, which is really awesome and fabulous. And guess what? As of this video's release, the last chapter has also just been posted. So if you want to know how the story goes and how it concludes, feel free to read it on AO3. But yeah, thank you so much for hanging out with me in the pond for a while. Hope your skin didn't get too pruny. I don't know why I did that. These are my lovely pond dwellers. Thank you so much to them for supporting me every month, even though I really need to get better at my Patreon, and I'm so sorry that I have just not been in
my right mind recently.
So, you know, if you want to submit fan art as well, do so on my Discord server. Hey, I have a Discord server. You can join it, maybe. I don't know, can you? And I also have a bunch of social media. I don't do X anymore, so if you want to find me, you know, I prefer Blue Sky or Kara, but I also have Instagram, I guess. Hey, if you want, like, extra fun stuff, I'm most active on Tumblr, because of course I am. Look at me. Picture of sanity. Oh, also, check out my series Wild Word. I'll be returning to that very shortly because it's been a while and I miss it. Check all of that out. It will make me very happy, and I will see you all in the next video. Goodbye! Oh god, I'm gonna die.